The customer is king, and if you're a small business, double so. At least that was what we were led to believe. But today, things are changing. Now customers are getting really complicated. We are getting really complicated. They don't necessarily want to be treated like a king or a queen. What they are demanding is more social awareness, less environmental impact, and better worker rights. It is time to change from customer-centric focus to more of a life-centric focus. Is it? Well, to answer this and other questions, we have with us the global lead for design and creative tech at Accenture Song. Let's welcome Nick Law. Nick.
Hi, how are you?
Lovely to see you, Nick. Looking forward to listening to you. So, surprise us about this customer-centric. Now it's the life. You talk about life a lot in Accenture Song now. What are we supposed to expect, and how can we change to be more leading to the future?
Well, I mean, my presentation is going to go over not just our relationship with customers, but customers' relationship with technology and media, which is, after all, our medium as advertisers. So,
that's true.
And I think it's an important time because the maturity of the internet, it's changing very quickly, and I think we underestimate how complicated it is for our audiences to use these mediums in a way which help us and help them. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and hopefully I'm going to have some solutions at the end. So
let's hope so, and time for some questions as well. So Nick, all yours. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As was mentioned, I'm now at Accenture Song as the head of design and creative technology. Previously, I was at Apple for 3 years. Before that, at Publicis for a little bit, and before that at RGA for 17 years. And in the time that I've been working in the creative industries, simplicity is definitely a theme. It's something that has been talked about for a while. I've put the word deep in front of this simplicity, and you'll understand more as I go into it, because I think it's not just about simplicity, it's about simplicity in the middle of complexity. And so understanding that complexity is a very important part of what deep means here. Why this is important now, and I was alluding to this at the beginning, is that we're at a point where the internet has been around for a few decades, and what started off as the sort of promise of something very simple and useful has turned into something that has really become enmeshed in everything we do. And so if you think about what our job is as marketers or designers, our job is about being relevant, right? We've got to make people care about the things that we make and put out in the world, and you do that by being relevant. And so I'm going to talk about, in the first part of this presentation, how we've thought about relevance in the years before now. There was a time, for example, when as a marketer, being product-centric was the most relevant thing you could do. One way to think about this is to imagine a world before the internet, when the best you could do is make the best product and hope and communicate that product to people. Because before the internet, we didn't really know much about how people were deciding and making purchase decisions. The internet obviously has given us a lot more signals. We understand lifecycle marketing. We also see that people are using products often through a layer of software and service. So not only did the internet bring along the opportunity for us to see how people were making decisions about what to buy, but actually how they were using products and services. And so it made sense at the advent of the internet we thought about the products that we were making through the filter of the customer. And so this has become a sort of guiding light for a lot of marketers to be customer centric. And as I was suggesting, it makes perfect sense, and it's very relevant to think about products and about customer centricity when you know what a customer is doing, when you get insights about how they're making decisions about what to buy and how they're using products. Now, what's interesting is, and this is where we get to this term that we've come up with in Accenture song, life-centric, is that we've got to a point where maybe 10% of the time that we spend in connected media or in the internet is spent thinking about sort of commercial decisions, what I want to buy and what I want to use. The rest of the 90% is the rest of my life. And in fact, the last few things that we experienced as analog seem to sort of get sucked up into the internet during the pandemic through necessity. And so we have a life right now where we are so enmeshed and dependent on the internet that it's hard to separate the things we buy from how we connect with our families, politics, finance, entertainment, the world. And you can imagine that as a customer or as an audience, how it's hard for us to think about products and services separate from all of these things, because we are literally connecting these things through an interface every day. I might be scrolling through a story on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I might come across an ad for a bag. I might do some research in another browser, text a friend, find out what they think about the brand, look on my travel site to see whether I'll get the bag in time to go on my trip. All of these things, and I could go back, buy the bag, and then keep scrolling and reading about the news. So all of these things are not separate. They're all complicated and connected. And so what this has led to is not just the fact that we need to think about our audiences, not just as customers, but as people have lives that are connected to their, to our products and services that have nothing to do with our products and services. But we also need to recognize that we're at a point where everyone is dealing with what I call the complexity tax. There was a time when the internet was really a hyperlinked brochure, and it was a pretty good thing to get some information here and there. And now I think the internet has spawned so many things that we are so dependent on. And in some ways, the promise of the internet, which is to make use of our time in a way, has actually become something that has complicated our time. And it's a problem of complexity which is manifest in the quantity. So there are more things now in our sort of infinite scroll of the internet than we can ever consume. And there's a general anxiety when we're on the internet now, and especially in social, where we know that we'll never be able to consume everything that we're being offered. And so we're sort of burdened with this ability, this tax of how do I make a decision about something when I can never get all the information. So there's just a problem of quantity. There's just too much stuff to consume. And there's also a problem of quality. I think there's a lot of things now. There are more things to be designed on the internet than there are designers to design them. I use apps all the time. Many of the apps are just poorly designed. They are generally not interoperable. So I might be in an environment where I'm traveling and I have to fill out 5 separate apps, from an airline, from a government, from a medical information. All of this stuff I'll have to fill out over and over again. None of these things speak to each other, and if you think about this complexity tax also in terms of resources, the people that are most confused and unable to navigate through this world are people that have the least resources. I mean, in America, just dealing with your tax and health and education and finance all through the sort of prism of an interface. It's a self-service economy. If I have money, I can pay for other people to help. But right now, I think most people are trying to deal with these things through the internet. And so we're at this point that where not only do we need to think about the customers of our clients in terms of sort of life centricity and all the things they have to deal with, but also to recognize that that life centricity is by definition very complicated. And so our role, I think, as a marketer or a designer is what I call clarify the middle, right? And when I say middle, I'm going to talk about where everyone is, right? And what's interesting about our, this sort of how we need to clarify this complexity is that we have an industry. When I say an industry, a marketing industry, both on the client side and the agency side, that is shaped very differently to how our customers are using media and technology. So one way to think about it is the industry, the marketing industry, is sort of shaped like an hourglass, and it's shaped up by like an hourglass because at the top we've got a bunch of people that are really thinking about brands. And so if you think about more traditional advertising, what we have in that is people with great craft, right? Great writing, great art direction. People that really understand how to build a brand. They understand what a brand is. But increasingly, they're not very good at understanding the technology and media that those brands live, right? It's why often we call them traditional agencies. They're traditional because they're committed to doing great traditional work, but they don't always have a modern understanding of media and technology. And then down the bottom of this hourglass, we've got an emergent industry of performance marketing. And I think that's characterized by a group of people that really understand technology and really understand modern media, but typically they don't have great craft and they don't really understand brand. So the shape of the industry is really defined by these two tribes, a tribe of art at the top and a tribe of math at the bottom. And why it's so skinny in the middle is that these two tribes are like oil and water. And I've been on both sides of this hourglass. I've heard people at the top talk about the people at the bottom being, sort of heartless and mechanical and not understanding people. And I've been in amongst people down the bottom that look people at the top and say, well, they just don't understand modern media and what people are doing. The problem is that they're both right. That it's a false choice to think that one is right and one is wrong. Another way to think about the difference between what these two tribes achieve, it's sort of a simplified version of the funnel, where at the top they're very invested in making people feel something, and down the bottom they're very invested in making people act. Right now, the problem is that more and more getting people to feel something is difficult because they don't have time, and that complexity that I was talking about, they don't want to, if they're going to be entertained or given any sort of emotional nourishment, they're probably not going to go to marketing, right? And also getting people to click on a banner that's chasing them around the web is becoming more and more difficult because it's an efficiency play. And efficiency plays always run out of runway. Now, the thing that I think is most important here is that neither of these things are easy to do until you do the middle. And what I call the middle here is understand. It's sort of like mid-funnel, but it's more than that, because I think if you think about the middle here, then if you're able to understand something, then you're more likely to feel something and you're more likely to act. So to me, it's almost like a fulcrum. If you solve the middle, you're more likely to solve the top and the bottom. Unfortunately, in most marketing organizations and agencies, they start from the top and waterfall down from there. It's just very difficult, I think, and there's a big disconnect between the top and the bottom when you do it that way. The big crisis here is that if the industry is shaped like this, and by the way, shaped like this, not because it was designed, but because of these two tribes. So it's sort of grown up organically. The audience's behavior looks like this. So it's sort of the opposite of the shape of the industry. Most people are making decisions about the things that they want to buy and the things that they're interested in, and the products that they use, like this, right? If you think about it, how many times have you made the decision to buy something by going to YouTube and typing in, "Give me an Anthem ad"? You don't do that. You go to YouTube and you find out about the specifics of a product, the difference between this product and that product, you know, and you do that before you even feel anything. And so, in a way, the starting point is the middle, right? It's interesting. I just, I was at Apple for 3 years, and that's the most valuable brand in the world. And as far as I know, they've only ever done one traditional sort of brand campaign, which was Think Different. And the reason I think Steve Jobs did that campaign was when he got back to Apple, they didn't have great products. They had beige boxes that crashed. And so to tread water before they had good product, he did an Anthem ad, which sort of positioned the company. But really, the brand was built off the back of great product advertising. In fact, the first time that Apple started to grow was not during the Think Different campaign. It was when they launched the iMac, and all the advertising for the iMac was product advertising. And so what product advertising does is it makes you understand the product, and therefore it makes you feel. So people feel very strongly about Apple, not because they've done Anthem ads or done big metaphors, but because they've started in the middle. They've built the brand by making people understand the value of their products. It seems obvious, but in retrospect, so few brands think like this. And again, if you want to make people act, if you want to chase people around the internet with a banner, or if you want to target people with lower funnel performance marketing, give them a reason to act, help them understand why they should click. And so to me, I think this is a very intuitive and thoughtful way to think about it, because this is the way people are acting. But as I'm saying, the problem is the industry is actually shaped like an hourglass when everyone's behaving like an onion. And as I was alluding to at the beginning, the solution to this is not just to go to the middle, right? But it's to, as I said, clarify the middle. So this is where the deep simplicity is important. I say deep simplicity because it is a complex world, and you need to understand that complexity in the middle before you can achieve any simplicity. You can't achieve it just by being simple straight away without understanding it. And when you think about the process of that, it was deeply informed for me when I worked on a project way back in 2005. So this is a sort of a historical moment, I think, if you think of almost like a period piece. 2005 is a long time ago. The internet was very young. And in fact, this was before the iPhone came out. And I was working on this project called Nike Plus, where Nike had come up with this hardware, which is a pod that you put in your shoe. It speaks to a sensor in the nano, and it tracks your running. And I assembled a team at RGA, which was characterized by great expertise, both in the running category, but also in technology and design and experience design. And so I had this amazing sort of broad, systematic team with great storytellers. And what they did was that they came up with a visualization of what your runs would look like when this hardware uploaded all the data. Now, I don't have that interface. I don't have it because it was back in 2005. But I do remember that we did dozens and dozens of options. We explored it deeply. And I remember looking at one of the solutions that the team came up with and thinking, oh my God, we have taken all of our expertise, all of our deep knowledge, and we've transferred that straight to the consumer. So I was looking recently for something that was sort of indicative of that design, and I found this financial chart, and it just reminded me of what we did. It looked like this. So just imagine that this was showing a week's worth of running. We had put all the detail of our deep industry knowledge and our sort of systematic thinking into an interface, a desktop interface that at best confused the customer. Now, we didn't launch with that. We actually kept working. But I remember looking at this idea thinking, there's a problem here, and it's a problem of process. So one way to think about it is that the project would be represented by this axis down the bottom. So that is the time it took to do the project. And the axis that goes up is the amount of knowledge that you have about the problem, which sort of translate into a complexity, right? And so what you just saw was a result of this process of us starting with an idea, of asking lots of questions and seeing more and more connections, and seeing the complexity of the sort of data that hardware was gathering, and thinking about how we could be completely thorough, and do everything in our power to show the customer everything. Now, the important thing is to go through this same process, but at some point bring it back down to simplicity. And the way that I think about this is that the journey up into complexity is a journey of asking questions, and the journey down to simplicity is a journey of making decisions. And typically the people that are good at doing the first part are systematic thinkers that can connect things and understand things deeply. And the people that are good at the second part, which is simplicity, they tend to be subtractive thinkers. They tend to be simplifiers. They tend to be more classic creatives. And so that's a sort of, that's why the depth is important, because you need to understand the problem. But the simplicity, which is how you translate that problem into something simple, is equally important. But it's a choreographing exercise. You've got to know when to go from asking questions to making decisions, to go from seeing connections to making priorities and making sacrifices. Now, as I said, this was before the iPhone, so it was a desktop application, and you know, and the final sort of iconic design that we developed, which became like the identity for all of the digital sport at Nike, was this. And as you can see, it's very simple. It looks like all the skeuomorphism of the time, very Apple-like from the mid 2000s. And importantly, you sort of understand it at a glance because it's very simple, but there is this hover state where you see more detail. The complexity is there, but it's hidden until you need it, right? So it is both deep, but most importantly, it's simple, it's branded, it's beautiful, it feels like Apple. So that was a big lesson for me on how to choreograph things. And another way to think about this is not just how you choreograph and the process of simplicity, but if you're going to be doing deeply simpler work, then you need to understand the people that are going to be involved, because it isn't just the same people that have been working in advertising for the last 50 years. It's a different collection of people. One way to think about these people is in terms of the way they think. And it's also important to think about the company as a brain, right? Because that's all we have as creative companies. All we have is people with brains, right? And the whole company itself was represented by this sort of collective brain. At RGA, I developed this organizing principle called stories and systems, which is basically design and advertising coming together. And we were very strict about how we organize our teams, and it was based on people that were really good at systematic thinking and design and understood technology, but were creative, right? And people that were great classic storytellers and had the sort of craft that you would associate with a brand nowadays. Another way to think about this is to imagine, like, what's creativity in space and what's creativity in time, right? Because in the end, that's, to me, what the primal differences are between these two ways of thinking. So instead of thinking about advertising and creative companies in terms of the burn-back model, which is art and copy, I think this is a more primal and elevated way to think about how people work creatively. One way to think about it is that people that are great storytellers process the world one at a time. They're temporal thinkers. And people that are great designers process the world all at once. So they see the relationship between things. They're spatial thinkers. And, because I'd worked in both design and advertising before coming into the internet and worked in early interactive, this was a very familiar way for me to think about creative thinking. And it was at a higher level than perhaps art and copy, which would be nested on the right here. Now, interestingly, this construct is actually sort of true of the brain too. There is this conventional thinking that the left-hand side of the brain is rational and the right-hand side of the brain is creative. That's just not true. The left-hand side of the brain is a spatial processing unit, and the right-hand side of the brain is or the other way around. The right-hand side of the brain is a spatial processing unit, and the left-hand side of the brain is a temporal processing unit, right? And when you have a creative thought, both sides of the brain light up. The important part of the brain is actually the corpus callosum, which connects these two sides of the brain. That's where the action is. The action is actually in the connection between these two worlds, in the same way that I think the action for an art director, copywriter is not art or copy. It's an intersection of these things. So think about this in terms of not two departments, but of a connection between two ways of thinking to create something new. And so when you think about building teams, I think you need to think about having these two ways of thinking in a sort of leadership team, and then curate the team underneath, sort of based on how you take in a brief and try to solve a problem, using the sort of lateralizing between these two worlds, again, in the same way that a corpus callosum, which connects these two sides of the brain, works. And so just to sort of wrap up here, that's we're not ignoring the complexity, we're understanding it, and it's a type of creative thinking that's very good at understanding complexity. But in the end, the thing that we deliver has got to be simple, because there is this sort of middle of the way people are dealing with media and technology, which is incredibly complex. And what simplicity does, it gives weight to people's decisions. And our job as marketers and designers is to help people to make decisions in the middle of this complexity. And we do that by understanding the complexity with deep thinking and deep understanding and design. But then we deliver something simple. And because it's simple, it's human and it helps our customers. So that's all I got. We went through a lot there, but hopefully it holds together and it makes sense.
Well, it holds together. Some things make sense. It was quite intense in terms of philosophical almost, Nick. So impressive. Thank you so much. We have a few questions. Are you ready? We have 5 minutes more or less.
Mm-hmm.
With increased privacy, we will know less about the customer, presumably.
Yeah.
Is also a driver for this life-centered focus?
Yes, I think so, because, one of the things I didn't mention is understanding the sort of environment and customers. I don't think it's dependent on understanding individuals necessarily. I think understanding cohorts, collections of people, different communities, different behaviors, is more important in some ways to understanding specific identity. So I think you can do this approach without infringing on people's privacy. But I also think that in the end, we've got to be realistic about using the data that we collect as a platform to create ideas, not as a method to get to ideas. Like, you still have to have this intuitive leap. So think of the data that you collect as sort of augmented experience as a creative person. It's like an extended understanding of stuff that you would normally have just sort of picked up through your experience, but you get more experience and you get to think about things a little bit deeply, a little bit more deeper. So, I think that this way of working is actually very separate to infringing on people's privacy or understanding individual signals. So I think it's more than that. It's understanding culture and people in a sort of deep and human way.
Okay, not easy sometimes, but another question. I think we're okay with time. You mentioned Apple. What other brands have understood this deep complexity and impressed you with their thinking? Are there any other specific examples you may want to share?
I actually am very impressed with Airbnb. and I don't think it's a coincidence that Brian Chesky is a designer. So I'm actually I've always been a big fan of creative people that lead companies, because I think they're good at synthesizing these two ways of thinking, right? And so I'd say Airbnb is a great example. I think there are like small brands that have been able to do this. The issue becomes when you scale, and Apple's ability to do this at scale has a lot to do with the way that they've organized around function, as opposed to business units. So I think that has worked really well because they keep a sort of a deep discipline in each of their functions, and then they connect those functions without getting P&Ls in the way. So I think that's one of the reasons that Apple is unusually good at this, is because they don't create little versions of the company with business units. They have sort of pure functions where experts leading experts, and so you can combine these ways of thinking in a much more deliberate way.
So is this a deep simplicity concept not applied? Doesn't it apply to smaller companies? Does it go along with being big, or can a small company also try to embrace the deep simplicity, or it has to wait until it scales?
No, I don't think it is dependent on scale at all. And in fact, I think maybe one of the things that Accenture does well, because it is large, is have a suite of strategic disciplines that can be deeper, can understand industries better. And so maybe the deep part and the understanding of complexity can be achieved by bigger companies. But then I also think it's harder for bigger companies to turn that into something simple. That is a real discipline to that. And so it's a trade-off. Small companies typically can get to simplicity quicker, but maybe they don't have the depth of understanding of the environment as much as they could.
Okay. Final question. Well, more of a, what is Accenture Song? What are you working on at the moment? How are you going to change this industry? Could you advance any of your current secrets, work in progress? What are you doing tomorrow?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing that is true of Accenture, just generally, is that we work on different sorts of problems than maybe just marketing problems. And so, and actually a lot of the things we work on, we can't talk about because it is sort of deeply connected to the strategy or the product or even manufacturing of what our clients do. But I will say that the thing that I'm doing tomorrow and the thing that I do every day is how do you connect all of these things together to create, something, that you wouldn't get if you didn't have all the pieces. That's the advantage. And so, and I've done that in my career. I've connected different ways of thinking to create new ways of thinking, and that's what I'm continuing to do.
Yeah, and I can see what I've read, and I've heard you before talking or mentioning that the way you work at Accenture Song is, or the way you approach problems, any problem, is see, solve, simplify. That's 3
right.
S's.
That's correct.
And I guess simplicity is not new, because it seemed that Leonardo da Vinci had this quote that said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
That's
so
right. Yes.
Big no, it's not your idea, but you've taken over Leonardo da Vinci, who wasn't wrong at all. Who was? Do you agree with that? That it's a beautiful quote, and you're implementing it as best as you can from Accenture Song?
Yeah, and it's not easy. That's the thing. That's why we'll always be talking about it. It's not easy.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Nick Law, for joining us tonight, this afternoon here at this digital business virtual stage. And thank you to Accenture Song for being with us this year and previous year as Accenture. We hope to see you soon, so you can keep updating us on this deep simplicity and much more. Nick Law.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
I appreciate it.